The morning mist clung to the Afghan mountains like a gray shroud, and Corporal Sarah Martinez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time in 10 minutes. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced with the weight of responsibility that had been thrust upon her shoulders just 48 hours earlier. Sarah had never intended to become a sniper. She'd enlisted as a medic, driven by a desire to save lives rather than take them. But the Army had other plans when they discovered her exceptional marksmanship skills during routine training exercises. Her instructors were amazed by her natural ability to hit targets at distances that challenged even seasoned marksmen. "Martinez, you've got a gift," Sergeant Williams had told her after she'd consistently hit targets at 800 meters with iron sights. "We're recommending you for advanced sniper training." Sarah had initially resisted. The idea of being responsible for ending lives conflicted with everything she believed about her purpose in the military. But her commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, had explained the reality of modern warfare. "Sometimes, Corporal, the best way to save lives is to eliminate the threat before it can harm your brothers and sisters in arms," he'd said. "You could be the difference between a successful mission and body bags coming home." Reluctantly, Sarah had accepted the additional training. She excelled beyond everyone's expectations, mastering not just the technical aspects of long-range shooting, but also the mental discipline required to remain calm under pressure. Her instructors noted her exceptional ability to calculate wind speed, distance, and elevation adjustments quickly and accurately. Now, positioned on a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow valley, Sarah found herself in exactly the situation Captain Rodriguez had described. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target would be traveling through this pass sometime before noon. The target was a bomb maker responsible for numerous IED attacks that had killed and wounded dozens of coalition forces. What made this mission particularly challenging was that the target would likely be traveling with civilians, possibly including women and children. Sarah's orders were clear: eliminate the target only if she could do so without collateral damage. The margin for error was zero. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Thompson, lay beside her with binoculars trained on the valley below. Jake was a veteran with 2 previous deployments, and his calm demeanor had helped Sarah feel more confident about her first real-world mission. "Movement to the east," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible even though they were alone on the mountainside. "Looks like a convoy of 3 vehicles approaching the checkpoint." Sarah shifted her position slightly, peering through her scope at the distant checkpoint where Afghan National Army soldiers were stationed. The checkpoint served a dual purpose. It was both a legitimate security measure and a trap. Intelligence operatives had leaked information suggesting the bomb maker would try to pass through this specific location. The first vehicle, a battered Toyota pickup truck, slowed as it approached the checkpoint. Through her scope, Sarah could see several men in the truck bed, but at this distance, positive identification was impossible. The second vehicle was a small sedan with what appeared to be a family inside. The third vehicle, another pickup truck, carried supplies and more passengers. "Range is 1,200 meters, Jake reported quietly, making calculations in his head. "Wind is light, maybe 3 miles per hour from the northwest." Sarah made the necessary adjustments to her scope, her breathing becoming more controlled and deliberate. She'd practiced this scenario hundreds of times in training, but the reality of having actual human beings in her crosshairs was something no amount of preparation could truly simulate. The vehicles had stopped at the checkpoint, and Sarah could see the Afghan soldiers beginning their inspection routine. This was the critical moment. If their intelligence was correct, the bomb maker would attempt to pass through with forged documents or try to bribe his way past the checkpoint. "Second vehicle is cleared through," Jake reported. "First truck is still being inspected." Sarah focused her scope on the first truck, studying each face carefully. She'd memorized the target's photograph, but identifying someone at 1,200 meters required patience and precision. The man appeared to be Middle Eastern, of average height and build, with a short, black beard. But those details could describe thousands of men in the region. "Wait," Jake said, his voice tense. "Third vehicle is backing up. They're trying to leave." This was exactly what their intelligence had predicted. The bomb maker would likely be in the vehicle that attempted to flee when they realized the checkpoint was more than routine. Sarah shifted her aim to the third truck, which had indeed begun reversing down the narrow mountain road. Through her scope, she could see panic in the truck. Men were shouting at the driver, pointing in different directions. One man stood up in the truck bed, scanning the surrounding hills with what appeared to be binoculars. He was searching for exactly what Sarah represented: hidden coalition forces. "Target is in the third vehicle," Jake confirmed, studying the scene through his own optics. "Man with the binoculars matches the description from intelligence. Dark jacket, black beard, scar on the left side of his face." Sarah found the man in her scope. Even at this distance, she could see the scar that intelligence had specifically mentioned. This was their target. But the truck was moving, making the shot exponentially more difficult. Worse, there were at least 4 other men in the vehicle, and Sarah couldn't be certain all of them were combatants. "Vehicle is accelerating," Jake reported. "They're definitely trying to escape." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She led the target, calculating the speed of the vehicle and the distance the bullet would travel. At 1,200 meters, her bullet would take approximately 1.3 seconds to reach the target. In that time, a vehicle traveling at 30 miles per hour would move nearly 60 feet. But as she prepared to take the shot, something unexpected happened. The truck hit a pothole and lurched violently to one side. The man with binoculars lost his balance and fell against another passenger. For a moment, Sarah lost sight of her target in the confusion. "Do you have the shot?" Jake asked urgently. Sarah steadied her breathing and refocused. The truck had slowed slightly due to the rough road conditions, which actually worked in her favor. She could see her target again, but now he was partially obscured by another man who appeared to be trying to help him regain his footing. The seconds ticked by like hours. Sarah knew that once the truck reached the bottom of the valley, it would disappear around a bend in the road, and their opportunity would be lost. The bomb maker would escape to continue his deadly work, and more coalition soldiers would die from his devices. "Shot window is closing," Jake warned. 30 seconds before they're out of range. Sarah made her decision. She would wait for a clear shot, even if it meant letting the target escape. She wouldn't risk hitting an innocent person, regardless of the mission's importance. This wasn't just about following rules of engagement. It was about who she was as a person and as a soldier. 20 seconds, Jake counted down. The truck continued bouncing down the rough road. Sarah kept her crosshairs trained on the area where she'd last seen her target, waiting for him to reappear clearly in her scope. 15 seconds. Then, as if the universe had decided to test her resolve, the truck hit another large pothole. This time, the impact threw the target clear of the other passengers. For perhaps 3 seconds, Sarah had a perfect view of the bomb maker through her scope. She could see his face clearly now. The scar, the dark eyes, the expression of fear as he realized how exposed he was. This was definitely their target. And in those 3 seconds, Sarah faced the most important decision of her military career. Her finger found the trigger as her breathing slowed to the rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times. The crosshairs settled on the target's center mass, just as she'd been trained. At this range, a center mass shot was the only reliable way to ensure a hit. "Take the shot," Jake whispered urgently. But Sarah hesitated. Not because she doubted her ability to hit the target, but because in that crystal-clear moment, she realized this shot would change everything. Once she pulled that trigger, she would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She would go from being someone who saved lives to someone who took them. The truck continued moving, and her window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Sarah's training told her to shoot, but her heart made her pause just long enough to ensure she was making the right choice. In that final second before the target would disappear from view, Sarah made her decision. She squeezed the trigger with the same steady precision she'd demonstrated in countless training exercises, sending a single bullet across the valley toward a man whose actions had killed dozens of innocent people. The shot would indeed save 6 lives, But the consequences of her decision would lead to questions that would challenge everything she believed about duty, authority, and the cost of doing what's right in an impossible situation. The crack of Sarah's rifle echoed across the valley like thunder, and for a moment, everything seemed frozen in time. Through her scope, she watched the bomb maker collapse in the truck bed, his body going limp as the vehicle continued its desperate escape down the mountain road. Direct hit, Jake confirmed quietly, lowering his binoculars. Target is down. But their mission was far from over. As the truck carrying the dead bomb maker disappeared around a bend, Jake's radio crackled to life with an urgent transmission from their command post. Overwatch, this is base. We have a situation developing at your location. A coalition patrol has been ambushed approximately 2 kilometers south of your position. Multiple casualties reported. Enemy forces are using the target's explosive devices to pin down our forces. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The very weapons created by the man she'd just eliminated were now being used against her fellow soldiers. Jake grabbed the radio and responded immediately. Base, this is Overwatch. Target has been neutralized. What's the status of the ambushed patrol? 6 soldiers trapped in a destroyed Humvee. Enemy forces have them pinned down with small arms fire and are attempting to move into position to use IEDs. We need immediate support. Sarah didn't wait for orders. She quickly began adjusting her equipment for a new engagement. The patrol in trouble was within range of her position, and if enemy forces were preparing to use explosive devices, she might be the only thing standing between those 6 soldiers and certain death. Jake, get me coordinates for the ambush site, she said, already scanning the valley with her scope. Through her binoculars, Jake located the source of the emergency. I can see smoke rising about 2,000 meters southwest. There's definitely a burning vehicle, and I can make out muzzle flashes from multiple positions. Sarah swung her rifle toward the new target area. Even with her powerful scope, the distance made it challenging to distinguish friend from foe. The terrain was rocky and uneven, providing numerous hiding places for enemy fighters. Base. This is Overwatch, Jake reported. We have visual on the ambush site. Requesting permission to engage enemy forces, threatening the trapped patrol. The response that came back would later become a crucial part of the investigation into Sarah's actions. Overwatch. Negative on engagement authorization. Wait for backup units to arrive. Do not engage without direct orders from command. Sarah lowered her rifle and stared at Jake in disbelief. They want us to wait while 6 soldiers die? Jake's expression showed he was struggling with the same moral dilemma. Those are our orders, Sarah. We can't engage without authorization. But as they watched the scene unfold below, it became clear that waiting wasn't an option. Through her scope, Sarah could see enemy fighters moving closer to the disabled vehicle. She could make out at least 3 separate positions where insurgents were firing at the trapped patrol. Jake, look at grid reference 245 to 887, Sarah said, her voice urgent. There's a man with what looks like an explosive device moving toward the Humvee. Jake trained his binoculars on the location Sarah indicated. Confirmed. Individual carrying what appears to be an IED, moving through the rocks toward our patrol's position. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Sarah could see that the trapped soldiers were running out of options. Their vehicle was destroyed. They were outnumbered, and enemy forces were closing in with explosive devices. In minutes, all 6 soldiers would be dead. Base, this is Overwatch, Jake called desperately. Enemy forces are advancing with explosive devices toward the trapped patrol. We need immediate authorization to engage, or those soldiers are going to die. Overwatch. Stand by for authorization. Do not engage until cleared by command. Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. She knew that military protocol existed for good reasons, but watching fellow soldiers die while waiting for paperwork seemed insane. Through her scope, she could see one of the trapped soldiers attempting to provide covering fire for his wounded comrades. I can take out the man with the explosive device, Sarah told Jake. Clean shot, no risk to our people. Sarah, You heard the orders. We wait for authorization. But as they watched, the situation became even more desperate. A second enemy fighter appeared, also carrying what looked like an improvised explosive device. They were coordinating their attack, planning to approach the disabled vehicle from 2 different angles. 2 IED carriers now, Sarah reported. They're going to kill all 6 of our people. Jake was torn between following orders and saving lives. He'd been in the army longer than Sarah and understood the importance of the chain of command, but he also knew what was right. The radio crackled again. All units, be advised that Colonel Morrison is en route to assume tactical command. All operations are to cease until his arrival. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. How long until the colonel arrives? Jake checked his watch and did quick mental calculations. At least 20 minutes, maybe 30. Those soldiers don't have 20 minutes, Sarah said grimly. Through her scope, she watched as one of the enemy fighters with an explosive device had moved to within 50 meters of the trapped patrol. The soldiers in the disabled Humvee were doing their best to return fire, but they were clearly outgunned and running low on ammunition. Jake, I'm taking the shot, Sarah announced, settling into her firing position. Sarah, you can't. You'll be court-martialed. Your career will be over. My career will be over anyway if I let 6 soldiers die because I was too scared to do my job. Jake understood the impossible position they were in. Following orders meant watching fellow soldiers die. Disobeying orders meant facing serious consequences, including possible criminal charges. If you do this, I'll have to report it, Jake said quietly. I'll support you, but I'll have to tell them exactly what happened. I understand, Sarah replied, her eye pressed to her scope. But those soldiers have families. They have people who love them. I won't let them die because some colonel wants to micromanage a firefight from 30 miles away. The first enemy fighter had reached a position where he could throw his explosive device at the disabled vehicle. Sarah could see him preparing to make his move. In seconds, the improvised bomb would detonate among the trapped soldiers, and the mission would become a recovery operation instead of a rescue. Sarah controlled her breathing and placed her crosshairs on the center mass of the enemy fighter. The range was just over 2,000 meters, a challenging shot under any circumstances, but the stakes made it feel impossible. Wind is picking up, Jake reported, trying to help despite his reservations about the unauthorized engagement. Sarah made the necessary adjustments and steadied her aim. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighter raising his arm to throw the explosive device. There was no more time for hesitation or debate. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet crossed the valley in just over a second, striking the enemy fighter in the chest just as he was about to release his improvised bomb. The device fell harmlessly to the ground several meters away from the disabled vehicle. Direct hit, Jake confirmed. Threat eliminated. But there was still the second fighter to deal with. Sarah quickly worked the bolt of her rifle and acquired the new target. This enemy fighter had seen his companion fall and was now moving more cautiously, using the rocky terrain for cover. Second target is mobile, Sarah reported, tracking the man through her scope. He's trying to flank the patrol from the east. The shot was even more difficult because the target was moving and partially concealed behind rocks. Sarah had to predict where he would appear next and be ready to take the shot when the opportunity presented itself. For nearly 3 minutes, she tracked the enemy fighter as he moved from position to position, always staying just out of her sight. But patience was a sniper's greatest weapon, and Sarah had learned to wait for the perfect moment. Finally, the enemy fighter made a mistake. He exposed himself while trying to get a better angle on the trapped patrol. Sarah had been anticipating this exact movement, and her crosshairs were already in position when he appeared. Her second shot was as accurate as the first. The enemy fighter dropped his explosive device and collapsed behind a boulder, eliminated before he could threaten the trapped soldiers. With the immediate explosive threat neutralized, the tide of the engagement began to turn. The trapped patrol was able to establish better defensive positions and call in their own coordinates for backup. Within minutes, additional coalition forces arrived to secure the area and evacuate the wounded. All 6 soldiers in the disabled Humvee survived, thanks to Sarah's unauthorized intervention. But as Jake made his required report to command, They both knew that her actions would have consequences that extended far beyond the successful rescue. "Base, this is Overwatch," Jake reported reluctantly. "Threats to the trapped patrol have been eliminated. All 6 soldiers are alive and awaiting evacuation. Overwatch, confirm your engagement status. Did you receive authorization to fire?" Jake looked at Sarah, who nodded for him to tell the truth. "Negative. Base. Engagement was unauthorized but necessary to prevent loss of American lives." The silence that followed lasted several seconds before the radio crackled back to life. "Overwatch, you are to remain in position until Colonel Morrison arrives. No further action is authorized." Sarah began cleaning her rifle methodically, knowing that the next few hours would determine not just her military future, but possibly her freedom. She'd saved 6 lives by taking 2 others. But in the rigid structure of military command, unauthorized actions had consequences regardless of their outcome. As they waited for Colonel Morrison's arrival, Jake tried to reassure her. "You did the right thing, Sarah. Those soldiers are alive because of you." "I hope the Colonel sees it that way," Sarah replied, though she suspected the coming confrontation would focus more on her violation of orders than on the lives she'd saved. Colonel Morrison arrived exactly 43 minutes later, his helicopter kicking up clouds of dust as it landed in a clearing below Sarah and Jake's position. Even from their elevated perch, they could see the colonel's rigid posture as he exited the aircraft, followed by 2 military police officers and what appeared to be an intelligence officer. "This doesn't look good," Jake muttered, watching the group begin their ascent up the rocky slope. Sarah had spent those 43 minutes mentally preparing for what she knew would be one of the most important conversations of her life. She'd reviewed her actions, her reasoning, and the regulations she'd violated. More importantly, she'd thought about the 6 soldiers who were now safe with their families because of those violations. When Colonel Morrison finally reached their position, his first words weren't what Sarah had expected. "Corporal Martinez," he said, his voice stern but not hostile. "I understand you took unauthorized shots at enemy combatants approximately 1 hour ago." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, standing at attention. The colonel studied her for a long moment before asking the question that would become the focus of their entire investigation. "Who authorized you to engage those targets?" "No one, sir. I made the decision independently when I observed enemy forces preparing to kill 6 trapped American soldiers." Colonel Morrison's expression hardened. "Corporal, do you understand that military operations require authorization through proper channels? That your actions could have compromised ongoing intelligence operations? That you violated direct orders to wait for my arrival?" "I understand the regulations I violated, sir. But I also understand that 6 American soldiers are alive today because I chose to act." The colonel turned to Jake. "Corporal Thompson, did you advise Martinez that her actions were unauthorized?" "Yes, sir. I told her she would face consequences for engaging without permission." "And yet you provided support for her shots?" Jake hesitated for just a moment before answering. "Sir, I observed the tactical situation and determined that Corporal Martinez was correct in her assessment that immediate action was necessary to prevent American casualties." Colonel Morrison walked to the edge of their position and looked down at the valley where the rescue operation was still ongoing. Medical helicopters were evacuating the wounded soldiers, and ground forces were securing the area where Sarah had eliminated the enemy fighters. "The bomb maker you eliminated in your first engagement," the colonel said without turning around, "was responsible for 17 separate IED attacks over the past 6 months. Those attacks killed 9 coalition soldiers and wounded 37 others." Sarah wasn't sure if this was meant to justify her actions or condemn them, so she remained silent. "Your second engagement prevented what would have been a catastrophic loss of American lives," the colonel continued. "All 6 soldiers in that patrol have families, children, parents who won't have to attend funerals because of your unauthorized decision." The colonel turned back to face Sarah, and she could see that his stern expression had softened slightly. "However," he continued, "military discipline exists for crucial reasons. Orders must be followed, even when individual soldiers believe they know better. The chain of command cannot function if every soldier decides independently when to engage the enemy. One of the military police officers stepped forward with handcuffs, apparently ready to arrest Sarah on the colonel's orders. But Colonel Morrison held up a hand to stop him. "Before we proceed with any disciplinary action," the colonel said, "I want to understand exactly what happened here. Corporal Martinez, walk me through your decision-making process." Sarah took a deep breath and began explaining the sequence of events that led to her unauthorized engagement. She described the intelligence about the bomb maker, the opportunity to eliminate him, and the subsequent emergency with the trapped patrol. "Sir, when I saw enemy fighters moving toward our soldiers with explosive devices, I had approximately 30 seconds to make a decision. I could follow orders and watch 6 soldiers die, or I could violate those orders and save their lives." "And you chose to violate orders," the colonel stated. "Yes, sir. I chose to save American lives." The colonel was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing the competing demands of military discipline and practical results. Finally, he spoke to the intelligence officer who had accompanied him. "Major Patterson, what's your assessment of the intelligence value of the targets that were eliminated?" Major Patterson consulted a tablet computer before responding. "Sir, the primary target was a high-value individual we've been tracking for months. His elimination significantly disrupts enemy bomb-making capabilities in this region. The secondary targets were mid-level fighters, but their elimination prevented what could have been a propaganda victory for enemy forces. So, from an intelligence perspective, Corporal Martinez's actions were beneficial?" "Absolutely, sir. She accomplished more in one engagement than we've managed in weeks of planned operations." Colonel Morrison turned back to Sarah. "Corporal, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. If you found yourself in an identical situation tomorrow, with the same choices and the same potential consequences, what would you do?" Sarah knew this was a crucial moment. The colonel was essentially asking whether she would continue to violate orders if she believed it was necessary to save lives. "Sir, I would hope that command would authorize appropriate action to save American lives. But if authorization was denied and soldiers were about to die, I would make the same choice I made today." The colonel nodded slowly. "That's exactly the answer I expected, and exactly the problem we face." He walked away from the group and spoke quietly into his radio for several minutes. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she could tell it involved people much higher in the chain of command than anyone present. When he returned, his demeanor had changed significantly. "Corporal Martinez, you are being recommended for the Bronze Star Medal for your actions today. Your accurate shooting under difficult conditions saved American lives and eliminated high-value enemy targets." Sarah was stunned. She'd been prepared for a court-martial, not a commendation. "However," the colonel continued, "you are also being formally reprimanded for violating direct orders and engaging without authorization. This reprimand will remain in your permanent record." The colonel's solution was brilliant in its practicality. Sarah would be recognized for saving lives, while also being held accountable for violating orders. The military could maintain discipline, while acknowledging that sometimes the right thing to do conflicts with proper procedure. "Sir," Sarah said carefully, "may I ask who ultimately authorized the recognition for my actions?" Colonel Morrison smiled for the first time since his arrival. "Corporal, there are some decisions that can only be made after the fact. The authorization you should have received to engage those targets has been retroactively granted by Theater Command, based on the tactical situation and the successful outcome." Sarah was beginning to understand the complex politics of military decision-making. Her actions had been simultaneously unauthorized and necessary, wrong according to protocol but right according to results. "One final question, Corporal," the colonel said. "Do you believe you made the right choice today?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely." "Good. Because the Army needs soldiers who can make difficult decisions under pressure, even when those decisions involve personal risk. Your actions today demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment we want in our special operations personnel." The colonel's last statement caught Sarah completely off guard. "Special operations, sir?" "Corporal Martinez, you've just demonstrated that you can make accurate shots under pressure, assess tactical situations independently, and accept responsibility for difficult decisions. Those are exactly the qualities we look for in our elite units. Major Patterson stepped forward with a folder of documents. Corporal, if you're interested, we'd like to offer you an opportunity to apply for advanced special operations training. Your skills and judgment make you an ideal candidate. Sarah looked at Jake, who was grinning broadly despite the tension of the past few hours. She thought about the 6 soldiers who were alive because of her decision and about the bomb maker whose death would prevent future attacks on coalition forces. Sir, I'm honored by the opportunity, Sarah said, but I have one question. In special operations, will I have the authority to engage targets when American lives are at stake without waiting for authorization from distant commanders? Colonel Morrison's answer surprised everyone present. Corporal, in special operations, you'll often be the distant commander. The decisions will be yours to make. 3 weeks later, Sarah received 2 pieces of official correspondence. The first was the Bronze Star Medal citation, recognizing her heroic actions in eliminating enemy combatants and saving American lives. The second was her acceptance into the Army's most elite sniper program, where she would train to become part of a unit that operated with considerably more autonomy than conventional forces. The 6 soldiers whose lives she'd saved each wrote her personal letters of gratitude. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, the patrol leader, wrote, Corporal Martinez, my daughter will get to meet her father because you had the courage to do what was right instead of what was easy. There is no regulation more important than that. Jake was reassigned as her permanent spotter, and together they would go on to serve 3 more deployments in special operations units. Their partnership, forged in that moment when they chose to save lives over following orders, became legendary within the special operations community. Years later, when Sarah had achieved the rank of Master Sergeant and was training new snipers, she would tell them about the day she learned the difference between following orders and doing what's right. Sometimes, she would say, the most important authorization you'll ever receive is the one you give yourself to save American lives. But remember that with that authority comes complete responsibility for the consequences of your actions. Colonel Morrison, who had been promoted to general, would eventually write in Sarah's final performance evaluation, Master Sergeant Martinez represents everything we want in a special operations soldier. She has the technical skills to eliminate targets at extreme range, the tactical judgment to assess complex situations independently, and the moral courage to accept responsibility for difficult decisions. Her unauthorized engagement that saved 6 American lives demonstrated that sometimes the most important quality in a soldier is the wisdom to know when rules should be broken. The story of Sarah's unauthorized shots that saved 6 lives became part of the curriculum at the Army Sniper School, studied as an example of how individual initiative and moral courage can achieve results that strict adherence to protocol never could. And whenever new students asked who had authorized her to take those life-saving shots, their instructors would smile and repeat Sarah's own words from that day on the mountain. Sometimes the authorization you need most is the one you give yourself to do what's right.